Grab your handout on Mounce chapter 30. We're going to cover the perfect participle, and we'll look at the rest of the lesson material a little bit later. We'll go through that a little bit later. All right, so we're going to just focus on how to form the perfect participle, and then some comments about translating it in just a little bit. But we have, first of all, the perfect active participle formation up here on your handout. So just as for the present and the aorist stemmed forms, we can create participles using those verb stems. We can do that with the perfect as well. Okay? So when we do that, what are we going to use? We've got to use the perfect active stem, which means you go to which principal part in your principal parts list if you wanted to try to find that? The perfect active stem will be the fourth. Okay? The fourth column. That's going to use reduplication. Remember, augmenting aorist stems in the participle doesn't happen because we don't augment outside the indicative. Okay? The perfect, their reduplications are not augments, so those will stay even in the participle. So we are going to reduplicate. You will see reduplication, which is good because sometimes we can't tell that a participle is aorist instead of present because of the lack of the augment, right? So we have to think about that a little bit more. You're going to see the reduplication on perfect participle, so those will be fairly obvious when you see them. The tense formative will be kappa. So here, this is going to be slightly different from the perfect active indicative, which use what? Kappa alpha. Okay, so here we're just going to see the kappa visible. Following the kappa, we will have the participle morpheme Omicron tau. Now, here is a slight difference from the other forms. Others use what? Nu tau. So remember, when we first learned participles, we learned OT and NT, Old Testament and New Testament, right? And the intertestamento was the in-between, the middle passive. So OT and NT are active. Meno, menes are middle passive. Okay? So we're going to see OT. And because we're going to add case endings to the tau of OT, which declension pattern are we going to be looking for? Yeah, we're looking for third declensions, except for the feminine forms. Remember, feminine forms are always first declension, no matter what. Okay, so take a look at the forms here. With luo, I get the reduplication, le. I get the perfect stem, which happens to be lu, which is really what luo's stems are in all the forms. Then my kappa, and then I would have had ot followed by the sigma. Now, how come I have os here instead of ot? That's right. Cot would become sigma, tau falls out, omicron compensatorily lengthens when I lose that. Okay? So that's what I've got. The tau is visible here in the genitive, and my case ending is normal looking. So for the feminine form, what I get is the reduplication, the stem, the kappa, but I get this ui, 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 ui. Okay? Ui, gooey. So, and then my first declension alpha with no case ending for the nominative, sigma, iota, nu, right? The same cast of characters for first declension case endings. Now, what you've seen for meno, mene, and the other forms like usa is you get the eta sigma here. Okay? Why do I have the alpha all the way throughout in the singular instead of alpha, eta, eta, alpha? Yes, I don't remember if we've talked about the RAI letters, but if we have rho, epsilon, or iota before the alpha, then the alpha will stay in the singular. If you don't have the RAI letters, then it will should go to eta here in the genitive and dative. All right, and then for the neuter forms, we have kos and katas with the omicron and then a sigma here. Now, this sigma is not characteristic of the neuter singular third declension neuter nominative ending. So this is really, there's not a good explanation for this, but you will notice that there at least is a difference, right? The omega versus the sigma here. Otherwise, they're going to look the same, and then your neuter singulars are identical in the nominative and the accusative singular, and in the nominative and accusative plural. All right, so let's read these forms together real quickly. Ready? Lelucos, lelucatas, lelucati, and lelucata. Lelucatis, lelucaton, lelucasi, which would have been cut C, right? But the tau before the sigma fell out. And then lelucatus. Feminine forms, leluquia, leluquias, leluquia, leluquian, leluquii, leluquion, leluquiais, leluquias. And neuter forms, lelucas, lelucatus, lelucati, lelucas, lelucata, lelucaton, lelucasi, lelucata. All right, excellent. So here on the second perfect participle, what I want to point out to you is that with the first perfect, we have verbs like leluca. Luo is a first perfect, and so it's going to have the kappa alpha on its indicative form. Gegona from genomai is a second perfect, and it is missing the kappa alpha, but the alpha is present from the second perfect tense formative. Now, leluca becomes lelucos for its perfect active participle. So with the first perfect, we see the kappa, but not the alpha, right? With gegona, then, it would have been gegonka. The kappa is missing, and so the participle is going to be gegonos. So we're using reduplication. We're using the stem, but the alpha is gone here as it is here. Kappa, alpha, alpha, cos, os. So we're just going to see os instead of cos for our form. Okay. Otherwise, the perfect forms will be exactly the same as the other forms that we've seen, just missing the kappa. So gegonos, gegonatas, gegonati, and so forth. Okay. So whatever verb has a second perfect active in the indicative mood will have a second perfect active participle. You won't all of a sudden have a switch there. All right, now let's take a look at the the perfect middle passive participle formations. We do not have this distinction between first perfect and second perfect middle passive because there is no tense formative in the perfect middle passive. So there's no distinction then among one tense formative versus the other because there's not one. Okay, so how do we form the perfect middle passive participles? We use the perfect middle passive stem with the reduplication of the stem. Which column in our principal parts is this? It's the fifth column. That's right, fifth column. All right, tense formatives are none, lelumai. Remember, that's our perfect middle passive indicative for singular. There is no kappa, kappa alpha, or anything like that. So we don't use a tense formative. We use the meno-mene participle morphemes. And because we have Omicron and eta for our stem vowels, we're following a 2-1-2 declension pattern. So let's take a look at the forms here, and I'll have you read them with me. Repeat after me. Lelumenos, lelumenu, lelumeno, and lelumenon. For the plurals, lelumenoi, lelumenon, lelumenois, and lelumenus. All right, for the feminine forms, lelumene, lelumenes, lelumene, lelumenane, lelumenai, lelumenon, lelumenais, and lelumenas. In the neuter forms, lelumenon, lelumenu, lelumeno, lelumenon, lelumena, lelumenon, lelumenois, and lelumena. Okay, so that's how we form these. The 6 forms to remember, which are the 6 nominative and genitive forms for each of the genders, the active and then separately the middle passive, will look like this. So, kos, katas, quia, quias, kos, kas, katas. Okay, so memorize those. Why do we want to know the genitive form? Because that's where we see the real form, where the sigma can obscure the real form in the third declension. Okay, we get to see the real stem that's being, has these case endings added to it. And then menos, menu, mene, menes, menon, menu. These are all the same that you've seen for the other middle passive forms. So there's nothing new here. There's no tense formative, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay? All right. So this is the second handout for Mounce Chapter 30. If you want to open Mounce textbook to Chapter 30, please feel free to do so. What we're going to deal with here are the genitive absolute constructions first, and then we'll talk about some other uses of the participle in terms of periphrastic constructions and some other adverbial ways that the participle can be used. So let's talk about the genitive absolute participle constructions. On your handout, I give you a definition here of absolute. Mounce doesn't exactly provide this definition, but I think it's appropriate here. In grammar, an absolute construction is one that has no syntactic dependencies within the core clause. What does that mean? Well, simply what that means is that there isn't a situation where the participle is syntactically dependent upon or governed by something else in the clause, or any absolute form. So you might have come across in your reading something called a nominative absolute, where in Greek or in other languages you have a situation like this. Charlie, I like him. Charlie is a nominative absolute, or would be described as a nominative absolute, because it doesn't really have any syntactic role in the core clause. It's not the subject, because the subject is I, and I like him. It's not the object, because him is the object, and I like him. So Charlie is just kind of dangling at the front of the sentence. It is frequently referred to as a nominative absolute. It's not syntactically dependent. Now, let's take the genitive nouns here in our examples. And I want you to think about why these nouns are genitive. So look at number 1. We have ego eimi hahuias tu theou. I've underlined the genitive expression here. Why is tu theou in the genitive case here? I am the son tu theou. Yeah, why is that genitive? Okay, so there is a relationship that theos and huios have, right? And when I say this, I'm saying that I am whose son? God's son. So there is a genitive relationship between one noun and the other. Okay, so it's genitive for that reason. Look at number 2. Ego ekusa tes phones autou. Why is this word phone, why is that genitive case? Okay, it's the object of ekusa, and most of the time our objects are what case? Accusative, but there are some verbs that take direct objects in other cases. You'll see some with dative case nouns, others with genitive nouns. Akuo could take its object in the accusative or the genitive case. So, but there's a reason for this being genitive case, and it has to do with it being the object of ekusa. So I heard his voice. Now, for number 3, I have ego elthon apa tu patros. I came from the father. Why is tu patros in the genitive case? Okay, it's the object of the preposition apa, which requires its object to be in the genitive case. Okay? So in each of these expressions, there is a syntactic dependency of the genitive noun on something that requires the noun to be genitive case. When we come to the genitive absolutes, we're going to find that there are participles in the genitive case which are not syntactically dependent on something else that requires the genitive case. It just is that way. It's an absolute construction. It's not dependent. We have some participles that are nominative, and why are they nominative? Well, they're nominative because there's some noun in the sentence that's nominative that it has to agree with, and that's what determines its case. Not here, okay? These are genitive simply because the construction requires a genitive participle, okay? And so they are called genitive absolute constructions. If we wanted to pluralize it, The word absolute is an adjective, so we don't pluralize that. We would actually pluralize the noun genitive. So these are genitives absolute. All right? Now, what are some features of the genitive absolute construction first, and then we'll look at some examples. Number one, the participle that will be in a genitive absolute construction is adverbial, not adjectival. If it's adverbial, then it's going to take on certain adverbial semantic notions like when, time, or cause, why something happened. So we'll pay attention to those. We'll have some more participial functions in a little bit today. And because they're adverbial, they will be anarthrous. You will not have an article attached to these genitive participles. Number two, the participle will be in the genitive case, but not due to any syntactic dependency requiring the genitive case. And then if there's an overt subject for the participle, guess what case it'll be in? It'll be in the genitive case along with the participle. Number three, the subject of the participle will not be linked to any participant in the core clause, and this is true almost 100% of the time. So for all intents and purposes, we can act like that is true all the time. All right? Some people have described the genitive absolute, and I'm abbreviating it with a GA here, as a switch reference device. Because in most of our adverbial participles, the subject of the participle is also the subject of the main clause. So in your homework, most of the adverbial participles you've seen have been in what case? They've been nominative case because the subject of the participle is also the subject of the main verb in the main clause. When we have a genitive absolute, clearly, if the genitive subject of the genitive absolute participle is not represented by any participant in the main clause, the subject of the main verb in the main clause can't be the subject of the genitive absolute either. Okay? So this use of a genitive absolute is just sort of odd, and it has been used, according to people like Healy and Martin Cooley, to suggest that it's a switch reference device. It's signaling to you that the subject of the participle is not going to be the same as the subject of the main verb, unlike what is frequently the case. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. These come from the Mounce textbook, so they are in front of you in the textbook, but I've printed them here so that we could actually write on this on our screen here. So we want to analyze these participles and then think about who the subject of them is and look at the grammar of them as well. So the first one, say this with me. Legontis tauta, hoi mathetai apelthon. Now, what is the participle here in this first sentence? Legontes. So let's go ahead and highlight that. What case gender number is that participle? Legontes. Take a good look at it. That's nominative, plural, and masculine. Okay? Now, what does legontes mean? How would you translate it, or how could you translate it? Saying. Good. Saying. Tauta is accusative, neuter plural. Saying these things, the disciples apelthon, departed, went away. Okay? Now, who is performing the legoing action here? Who's doing the saying? The disciples. Hoi mathetai is likewise nominative plural masculine, right? So we have a syntactic match, and this means that my adverbial participle has a subject represented inside the core clause. Okay, hoi mathetai. Look at the next one. Legonton ton propheton tauta ha hoi mathetai apelthon. What case, gender, and number is this participle, legonton? So this is genitive, plural, and masculine. All right? Genitive, plural, masculine. Take a look at hoi mate tai inside the core clause. That's nominative, plural, masculine. Can the ones doing the speaking in the participle here be the same as the subject noun over here? No. Okay, so who's doing the speaking? Well, look at tone, profe, tone. What case gender number is that? That's also genitive, plural, masculine. Okay, and the tauta is the direct object of the participle as it was here. So how might I translate this? This is a genitive absolute where I've got a genitive participle and a genitive noun that matches the case. And none of them are represented in the main clause. How will I translate this? What did I tell you? Are they adjectival or adverbial? Adverbial. So we need to translate this as an adverbial participle, but we have an overt subject here. So I could say, if it's temporal, what? While the prophets say these things, or while the prophets are saying these things, hoi mate tai apelthan, the disciples left. Now, since this main verb is past, how might I tweak my translation here? This is a present stem, but does that mean it has to be present tense? No. It just has to be unbounded, so possibly progressive, right? Maybe while the prophets were saying these things, the disciples left. Prophets are one group, disciples are another, right? And in genitive absolute constructions, the subject of the genitive absolute is not represented in the main clause. Look at this third one, and repeat after me. Epontes tauta hoi mate tai apelthan. Okay, so my participle is epontes. Good. What case gender number is that? Nominative, plural, masculine. Excellent. And hoi mate tai, that is likewise nominative, plural, masculine. So I've got a match here, don't I? The subject of the participle is the subject of the main verb apelthan. So same subject. How would we translate epontes? This is now an aorist participle. We had a present stem over here. We've got an aorist participle over here. How am I going to translate this one? Well, so do I want to translate an aorist participle as contemporaneous action with the main verb? If it's temporal? Yeah, it's going to be after, right? So after, this isn't writing, but speaking, saying. It's leg, ape, right? Ape, ape, leg, leg. These are the same verb, just different stems. So after saying these things, the disciples departed. Okay? Now, the fourth example, repeat after me. Eponton ton profe ton tauta hoi mate tai apelthan. Almost the identical expression as the prior one, but what case is eponton? That's genitive, isn't it? Genitive, plural, masculine. And hoi mate tai is still nominative, plural, masculine. So are the disciples doing the talking here? Nope. Who's doing the talking? The prophets. The prophets are genitive, plural as well. Okay? So how am I going to translate this? After who? The prophets. Okay, yeah. Do I want to say after the prophets were saying? No, because this is an aorist participle, which is not viewing or portraying the action as in process, but just as a complete action, the whole action. Okay? So after the prophets said these things, the disciples left. All right? Now, let's look at the last examples here. Repeat after me. Didakthentes hupatu kuriu ex elthan estain ereman hoi douloi. Okay. Look at didakthentes. Is that a participle? It is. which tense stem along with tense formative is this? That is not quite future. Didacthentes. This is aorist passive participle. Remember, the aorist passive participle uses theta epsilon, but it uses the active nu tau participle morpheme. And then the S is telling me it's nominative, plural, and masculine. Okay? Now, if this is aorist passive, then whoever it's describing is not doing the action, but rather having the action done to them. Okay? So how might I translate this? What verb is this from? Didasco. So didasco is I teach, but didacthentes is what? After being taught, or after having been taught. It depends on what the verb's tense is in the main clause. Here it's ex elthen. What tense is ex elthen? It's an aorist tense, so it's past time. So I'm going to want to perhaps see this as being past, but prior to the main verb. So after having been taught, hupatu kuriu, what's that? By the Lord. Ex elthen eis tein eriman hoi douloi. What's the subject of ex elthen? Well, do I have a nominative case noun in the main clause? Yeah, where is it? It's at the end. You see hoi douloi? That's nominative plural masculine, right? So it's the subject of ex elthen, and since it's matching the case of didacthentes, it's the subject of the aorist passive participle too. Okay? So the servants, after being taught by the Lord, went away, eis tein eriman, into the desert. Okay? So this is nominative. Subject is nominative. You could say after they had been taught by the Lord. Yep, that'd be fine too. All right. Now the next form is didacthenton with tone prophetone, and then everything else is the same. So what case is didacthenton? That is genitive. Okay, plural masculine. Hoi douloi is still nominative. Plural masculine. So are the servants the ones who were taught over here? Nope, not in the second one. Who was taught? The prophets, because that's genitive case. So how would we translate this? After. Exactly. After the prophets were taught by the Lord. The servants went away to the desert. Okay? So this one is a genitive absolute. Okay,